Hi, I recently was able to see Little Richard, I Am Everything, the new documentary about the legendary rock and roll performer. It goes into great detail about his background and his life, and particularly his status as a gay icon. He was very open about his sexuality from a very young age and incorporated it into his early acts. He started out performing in gay clubs and drag clubs and eventually managed to transition into mainstream success. Even we hear the original lyrics of Tutti Frutti, which are outrageously explicit, and it's really no surprise that they were sanitized before it could become a releasable song. Um, it depicts his life and its contradictions in great detail. The fact that he would several times give up music to become a man of God, a preacher, um, but then come back and embrace the rock and roll again and have a whole revival in his career. I mean, splitting away from rock and roll in the 60s and much of the 70s, and then making a comeback in the film Down and Out in Beverly Hills, his only real acting role, um, which saw a complete revival of his music. Um, Although I found it to be generally an interesting movie and very illuminating one regarding the parts of his life that wouldn't be talked about publicly at the time, I did feel that the way the story was being told, the way it was being directed, was flawed. There is a a running narrative that rock and roll and everything beyond that all comes from Little Richard. And it's very much a thesis that is never contradicted. There is certainly a lot to back it up. There is a strong argument for that, but I felt there was never any kind of counterbalancing voice, which is not necessarily an error because that's simply the story that they wanted to tell. But the way that it insists on this kind of narrative and the spirit and the magic of Little Richard manifesting itself as stardust settling on various bits of stock footage, I felt was going a bit far. Um, if the film has such a thesis, it doesn't need to resort to such cheesy theatrics to try and present it. It seems to have more than enough to go on with evidence and testimony from people who were there, rather than this kind of cheap trickery. Um, it's an interesting film, certainly, and a fascinating man and an extraordinary talent with fantastic music. But this particular portrayal of his story is maybe not all that it could be. I did feel like there were certain parts that were being skated over a little bit, but maybe just because of time rather than because of any other motive. But it's a flawed film.